keeping with the recruiting theme, seeing as how we just had a recruiting update from Jordan, I wanted tonight to kind of go through the top 10 recruits of all time for Clemson football. I'm pretty sure every name on this list you guys will recognize. They are the highest rated recruits according to the recruiting people, right? So I pulled this list specifically from 247 Sports. Sitting in at number 10 is a current linebacker for the Clemson Tigers, just finished up his freshman season, had an amazing season. That's none other than Sammy Brown out of Georgia. Obviously, we know how his freshman season went. Jordan, what were your thoughts on Sammy Brown and his career so far as a Clemson Tiger?
Yeah, Sammy has definitely been as advertised so far in his career, even in just the one season. It was pretty incredible, just how little snaps he got, especially through the first half of the year. And when he got in, he seemed to always find a way to lead the team in tackles, and just he was all over the place. He showed a ton of promise. I mean, we all know how freakish he was coming out of high school, so it wasn't really a surprise. But I've been really pleased with what he's shown so far, and I think that the projection is as high as it can possibly get, and he has a chance if he keeps trending in this direction to be one of the best that Clemson has had. So been really pleased with how he's developed, at least through his first year.
All right, moving into the number 9 spot. This is a guy that a lot of fans do not have the best memories of, but he was a highly touted quarterback out of California. One DJ Uiagalelei spent 2 seasons, well, I guess 3 seasons at Clemson before transferring to Oregon State, and then ultimately finishing his career this past year at Florida State. His first year starting, he threw for 9 touchdowns and 10 interceptions in that 2021 season. And that was kind of the beginning of the end, the beginning of Clemson's big skid that they went on for about 3 or 4 seasons there. And DJ just could never regain that freshman magic that he had in those 2 games for the Clemson Tigers. Ultimately never regained it at Oregon State or Florida State, ultimately kind of being benched at Florida State. I know he broke his hand, but honestly, they were about to move on from him, whether he broke his hand or not. So
yeah, you're right. And I think to DJ's credit in a lot of ways, I think he's definitely one of the I don't know if I could have gone through what he went through and it's been okay.
No.
He had a lot of stuff happen over his time at Clemson, off the field, on the field, and a lot of it not in his control, injuries. But I think despite that, he won a lot of games. I mean, by most metrics. I mean, he won 21 games as a start, or 21,
yeah.
21 or 22, 22, because if you can include the Boston College from his freshman year, he won 22 games as a starter, and 10 and led Clemson to double-digit win seasons. He had pretty good defenses on it, but but I think his time at Clemson wasn't without its highlights. Especially his junior year, I thought he made a significant improvement over the based if you compare it to his 2021 season. He was a lot more efficient, threw for way more touchdowns. 22 touchdowns, 7 picks. I think DJ's career is not going to be remembered fondly, but it wasn't it wasn't all bad. And I think he was a great ambassador for Clemson and a just stand-up guy, great teammate. And I think that should be appreciated, even if his career didn't pan out the way we all hoped it would.
Yeah, I mean, look, he certainly did not turn into the quarterback that every Clemson fan thought he was going to be coming out of high school. But again, to your point, he was a great ambassador for the university. Like I said, a high character guy. Not a guy you can really root against. He's just too nice of a guy All right, coming in at number 8 on the Clemson all-time recruit list is none other than current Clemson quarterback Kade Klubnik out of Westlake, Texas. Won multiple state championships. I don't think he ever lost a game as a starter in high school. He comes to Clemson. He's kind of sitting behind DJ, and then gets his first start, or not his first start, but played majority of that ACC championship game where he kind of lit it up. And then in the bowl game against Tennessee, it did not go well at all. And then his first season starting was not good. 2023 was obviously a rough season for Kade Klubnik. It was riddled with turnovers, both fumbles and interceptions, just poor decision making. But then you turn the page to last year, 2024, and he had probably the biggest bounce back season you've seen out of a quarterback in quite some time. Certainly out of pretty much any Clemson quarterback I can think of when it comes to bounce back seasons. Throwing for, well over 3,000 yards, 40 touchdowns, a bunch of yards, almost 500 yards on the ground, another, I think, 10 or 12 touchdowns on the ground. So, absolutely lit it up last season, a complete 180 from the season before, and now heading into his senior season for the Clemson Tigers, riding sky high on expectations for 2025. Your thoughts on Kade Klubnik coming in at number 8 and his career so far as a Tiger?
One thing I'll say about Kade Klubnik has been, and I think it took some. It's a new thing for Clemson fans, especially in recent history. If you think about the quarterback history at Clemson, especially the recent quarterback history, when you've had these highly touted guys, like for Clemson, it's really been they're either good right away or they just don't pan out. There's never really been an in between as of late. And so I think Kade Klubnik is the first example that Clemson fans have seen in a while of a 5-star guy that, had the ability to reach his potential, but wasn't there right away. He wasn't ready to go. He wasn't ready to do what his team needed him to do in order for them to win a lot of games. I think this is the first example of a guy that had to come in and develop. And we actually saw development. He had the tools, but mentally he wasn't there, and he got there. I think and I think you saw it over the course of last season. And now obviously his story is yet to be finished. It's still being written, but he's definitely been an example, the first example for Clemson fans, where a guy that had to come in and just get better.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's something that Dabo talks about all the time, right? The difference between college and pros is college football is still very much a developmental game. And Kade Klubnik is an example of a ultra talented guy, but wasn't ready to make the transition to big time college football yet. And Clemson fans were screaming in that 2022 season to bench DJ and bring Kade in. And the Clemson coaching staff ultimately knew what the fans didn't, and they knew that Kade Klubnik wasn't ready. Number 7 on the list, Jordan, Myles Murphy from the 2020 class, a guy that was highly touted, right? ACC honors as a sophomore, 40 tackles, 11 tackles for loss, 6.5 sacks as a junior. Ultimately drafted by the Cincinnati Bengals. Your thoughts on Myles Murphy and his career as a Tiger?
Yeah, Myles Murphy is the first example on this list of a guy that came in and was very good. He was very good, but he never took that next step. And I think that's one thing that I think people, when they look back on his career, are going to, kind of downgrade him for, because I think he was a special talent, coming in, as a true freshman in that 2020 class. He flashed a ton. He was really good. He was really good his sophomore year. But he just never, there was never that he never took that second. He never got to that second gear. There were times throughout his career where he would take plays off. He wasn't as impactful as you would expect him to do. He always graded out really well, and that was one thing that was it was just I think people didn't, if they weren't following Clemson, they'd be like, oh man, Myles Murphy, he's one of the best in college football. But I think there was another level he could have reached that he just never did. And I don't know how much of that was on his position coach or him personally, because I do think he was a guy that, he kind of a laid back type of guy, personality wise, really smart kid. He's an engineering major. But he didn't always play with that fire that you've seen from, previous Clemson defensive ends. And I think that was kind of ultimately what hurt him, because I think talent-wise, tools-wise, he could have been a top 10 pick. I think if he had reached the level that I think a lot of people maybe expected him to be. So I think his career, while it was good, it was never great, and he could have been great. So, I just, and, now he's with the Bengals and he hasn't really played all that much outside of, spot, snaps. He just has not reached his potential, and they have not gotten the return on using a first round pick on him so far. We're not and this isn't about his NFL career, but I'm just using it as an illustration of kind of, he's never had that second gear that I think you need when you're at that position.
Yeah, no doubt. Look, he was a guy who was ready when he arrived on campus to play, right? But ultimately, I think Isaac Smith in the comments put it best. He said it feels like Myles Murphy didn't reach his full potential. And I think that's the story of kind of Myles Murphy's career at Clemson. He was a very good defensive end for the Tigers and had a solid career, but never really, like you said, hit that next gear. He never maximized his potential while at Clemson. So, a little disappointing when you look at a guy like that and the talent level that he could be at. But again, Brent Venables was gone, new defensive coordinator. I'm sure some of that was on the position coach at the time. But ultimately, he's a guy that got called out by Dabo Sweeney in the media a few times about taking plays off and kind of being lazy on some stuff. So some of that was obviously personally on him as well as a player. So although I think he had a really solid career, it could have been a lot better, like you say. Number 6 on the list, somebody that I don't know if Clemson fans have heard about in a while, or some may not even know about, but Rosco Crosby from the 2001 class, wide receiver, did not play very much for the Tigers, played his freshman year, had 23 receptions for 396 yards and 3 touchdowns, and then ultimately got injured and then dropped out of school and went to play baseball. So not too big of a career for our boy Rosco Crosby, but a guy that had a lot of potential when he came to Clemson and just got stifled by injuries. And ultimately he decided to do what he thought was best for him, and that was go play baseball.
Yeah. Guy he was one of the highest profile kids from the state of South Carolina that we had seen in quite some time. I'm saying we had seen, like I was very little, but he really was just one of the highest. The excitement for him coming in was unimaginable. Had a really he had a promising freshman season, but just never was never able to get things right for himself.
Absolutely. Yep. All right, moving on to number 5 on the list, Jordan. One of my favorite Tigers of all time, Xavier Thomas, XT edge from the 2018 class, the same class as Trevor Lawrence, out of IMG Academy. Ultimately, he was from South Carolina, but went down to IMG Academy, and that's where
South Florence.
He signed on with the Clemson Tigers. Had a breakout freshman year. Right, just an absolute tear his freshman year. But a guy that battled probably some of the most adversity that any Tiger has in his career. I mean, you're talking about a blue chip guy that was, in his words, a 3-and-done guy for sure. And ultimately, that's really not how his career ended up going. He suffered the injury bug a lot. And then, when COVID came around, he got really sick. And when he got really sick, he got out of shape and gained some weight and dealt with some mental health battles that he spoke about in the media and stuff like that, and just how tough of a recovery that was from him, not only physically but mentally, and just a guy that came in with a bang, and then, in my opinion, ended his career with an absolute bang. His last year as a Clemson Tiger, taking that COVID year and coming back and really just solidifying himself as that true talent that we always knew XT could be, was certainly a leader on the team, and just super proud of that dude for all that he endured during his career, and ultimately how he turned all that adversity into that final season where he really balled out for the Tigers as an elite rusher.
Yeah, absolutely. Just he's a guy that is an example of, persevering through adversity. I mean, a guy that went through a ton while he was at Clemson. You mentioned that COVID year was really tough on him. He put on a lot of weight, wasn't, dealt with depression, and just wasn't able to hone in on his craft, and he struggled after a promising first 2 years. But I think ultimately the talent was, it was undeniable when you watched him play. Like, when he was himself and when he was healthy, when he wasn't dealing with the injuries that knocked him out for a year, but then for him to put together a full season of work and get drafted, I think that was just a great story. And, he's still a great ambassador for Clemson. And these guys I'll always appreciate. Definitely one of my favorite Tigers for sure.
All right, rolling right into the number 4 spot, none other than Dexter Lawrence, defensive tackle out of the 2016 recruiting class from Wake Forest High, North Carolina. This dude was an animal, man. Like, Dexter Lawrence in the middle of Clemson's defense is just an immovable object. He's a guy that has immense strength and power and just bullies offensive linemen, a guy that can pressure the quarterback from the defensive tackle position, wreak havoc in the backfield, create sacks. There's not a whole lot that Dexter Lawrence can't do, even getting in on offense in the big package, and helping the offense score touchdowns. But your thoughts on Dexter Lawrence and what he meant to the Tigers, and ultimately what you thought of his career as a Clemson Tiger?
Yeah, he's one of the guys on this list that honestly might be having a better NFL career than he did college career, and but that's saying a lot
because he had a really good Clemson career.
Yeah, I mean, Dex is an all-time great. I can't. I mean, I could spend a lot of time talking about him, but he was special, and I think he's going to be remembered fondly for in the college realm and in the NFL realm. He's a guy that doesn't come around very often. Truly, like I am very close to saying generational when you consider what he's doing in the league right now. Like he's doing things that only Aaron Donald was doing. And he's doing it as a zero tech. Like it just his impact as a pass rusher from that alignment, and just how dominant he actually is when you turn on the tape. I mean, I think he's the best in the league right now. But his college career was phenomenal. Two-time national champion,
champion,
all ACC honors.
Yeah, he's a rookie of the year, all ACC honors his sophomore and junior year. I mean, he's got all the accolades that you could possibly pile up as a defensive tackle.
It's a shame we didn't get him in that college football playoff as last year. That's the only thing that I have any regrets about or
that was
sadness
tough.
about is we didn't get to see him in that college football playoff, and that shows you how good that defensive line was.
Yeah, ultimately, they didn't need him, but
no, they did.
It still would have been nice to see big number 90 out there doing his thing. Another interior defensive lineman checks in at number 3, Jordan. Bryan Bresee, edge rusher from the 2020 recruiting class, number 1 overall recruit, number 1 defensive tackle in the class. Bryan Bresee had an interesting career as a Clemson Tiger. His freshman season was really good. Defensive Rookie of the Year his freshman season, kind of had that breakout year. And then it got tough for Bryan Bresee, both with the injury bug and a lot of off-the-field personal issues everybody knows about. What were your thoughts on Bryan Bresee's career as a Clemson Tiger?
Yeah, I think Bryan is definitely a what-if for me, another what-if for me, because it felt like he – for different reasons than Myles Murphy, never reached his full potential. I think, the injuries were definitely a problem. He tore his ACL in that 2021 season. And then, of course, we are, you already talked about, what he battled, with his sister. It just can't imagine what he was going through. But he was a pleasure to watch when he was on the field. He was scary at times. I think he definitely could have had a better career if things had gone, a little bit differently. But still ended up a first-round pick. He's shown a lot of promise in his NFL career so far. With the Saints, as he's worked his way into the starting lineup and is continuing to get better. So I think things are. I think while his career didn't play out as much as well as we all hoped, I think he's going to be remembered a little bit more fondly than Myles Murphy. I think because I feel like a lot of his shortcomings weren't necessarily in his control.
Another defensive lineman checking in for the Tigers at number 2 overall on the all-time recruits list for the Clemson Tigers, none other than Daquan Bowers, defensive end from the 2008 recruiting class, number 1 overall, number 1 defensive end out of Bamberg, South Carolina.
Yes,
shout out Bamberg. Your thoughts on Daquan Bowers and his career as a Clemson Tiger?
Yeah, just one of the best in school history. I mean, I can't really, speak, too, negatively about at least his college career. I don't, his NFL career didn't really turn out how maybe many of us thought, but he was special. I think he was one of the key recruits for Dabo in what it took to build Clemson into what it ended up being. And obviously, I think he started kind of the pedigree for Clemson at edge rusher, under Dabo Sweeney's tenure. So
let me rattle off his junior season stats for you real quick.
Yeah, his junior year was nuts.
He had 67 tackles, 26 tackles for loss, and 15 and a half sacks.
Good Lord,
in
man.
one season. His first 2 years, 83 tackles, 18 and a half tackles for loss, and 4 sacks over his first 2 seasons. Just an absolute beast. And we'll go ahead and transition to him. That's none other than national championship winning quarterback Trevor Lawrence out of the 2018 class, number 1 overall recruit, number 1 quarterback in the class, but splashed onto the scene his freshman year, right? Played early and often, ultimately supplanting Kelly Bryant as the starter of Clemson. He had an embarrassment of riches at wide receiver and just a absolute crazy unit as a defense, and ultimately went on his freshman year to win the national title.
Yeah, no, Trevor, phenomenal career. I mean, there's not really much more you can say. One of the best athletes in school history. And I think, his NFL career is, I think it's still, his story still being written. And when you look at that draft class, he's been easily the best out of that group. It's kind of crazy how highly touted that group was coming in, and it's not even, they haven't even come close to panning out, most of them. But Trevor, I mean, at least he has a Pro Bowl appearance. He has a playoff win. He's still the entrenched starter at the franchise that drafted him. So,
Yeah.
I think, we'll see what he can do under this new coach. I hope he's successful, but they lose every game. I can't root for the Jaguars, man.
Yeah, so that is your top 10 Clemson recruits of all time. Trevor Lawrence, number 1. Daquan Bowers, number 2. Bryan Bresee, number 3. Dexter Lawrence, number 4. Xavier Thomas, number 5. Rosco Crosby, number 6. Miles Murphy, number 7. Kade Klubnik, number 8. DJ Uiagalelei, number 9. And Sammy Brown, number 10.